Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 71, a special pre-Gimmel Tammuz edition. As promised last week, I'd like to begin with playing an audio recording, and I will not share what it is. Later on in this episode, I'll discuss it more in detail and how I found out what this is. It's special. That's the recording. As I said later on in the episode, I will address it more in detail. It's connected to Gimmel Tammuz. So let's begin by speaking about Gimmel Tammuz. Coming up 21 years, who would believe? I will refer you to episode 22 a year ago when we spoke about it in more detail. And now I'll try to address some other angles and other questions that had come in about this topic, this painful topic, but one that we must talk about, because if Chassidus is meant to be applied, where more is it apropos and necessary when we're addressing the issue of what a Rebbe is, where is the Rebbe, and how he plays a role in our lives today. So, as Gimmel Tammuz approaches, the past 21 years have given rise to a new generation of adults who have never seen the Rebbe, and are challenged to understand what the Rebbe means to them. As time passes, how can we avoid a gap developing between the generation who can vividly recall precious moments with the Rebbe with the next generation? How can we successfully bridge the two generations and instill the same passion, Mesiras Nefesh, and connection in an era faced with new challenges? This, of course, brings on the big question, what is a Rebbe and why do we need him? Another questioner writes, my husband and I are shluchim, and we try to inspire our children, some married and some not yet married, to understand and follow the Rebbe's guidance. Just today, my daughter, a mother of little ones, commented, Mom, we did not know the Rebbe. It's a new generation. How can I relate to the Rebbe who lived over 20 years ago? Of course, this made me very sad, and I chose not to answer. How can we inspire our children to be mekusher to a Rebbe that they do not know? A few other questions in the same vein. How long can we go on without a Rebbe? How do we explain the relevance of the Rebbe today? And others in the same spirit. And though, as I said, it's not always comfortable to read these, but not addressing it is even worse. We must be able to look at this in the face and, as Chassidim of the Rebbe, say, what would the Rebbe tell us to say? What should be our reaction? And just to say that we're in pain and that we have no answers is not enough, because people want some direction and guidance. And there's no question, as the Rebbe himself said so many times, La yaziv tzei marisei, that a shepherd never leaves his sheep. And there's some way the Rebbe is working and affecting us all today. So let me begin with this question, how long can we go on with a Rebbe? We don't go on without a Rebbe. We have a Rebbe. For some whatever bizarre and mysterious reason which we may never understand, God chose that it should be in this fashion, that we don't have a physical ability with our physical eyes to be able to directly experience it as we once did. But to say there's no Rebbe, chas v'shalom. I want to read among many different letters, and of course we don't have the time to go through every letter and every answer, but there were two that stood out that I would like to point out. One is a letter, these are from the times right after Tafshin Yud. So this is a letter written in Hey Cheshvan Tafshin Yud Aleph to Rabbi Michal Lipsker, who was Shliach of the Rebbe's in North Africa, in Morocco. And he writes, and I'll just translate it, he says, what you write, that you feel alone and isolated, and you have all kinds of, and you fall into weakness in your Aveda. The Rebbe says, Save dvarav mechiach al tchilasei. The end of your words reflects on the beginning, that this is all from the Eitzes HaYetzer, this is coming from the Yetzer Hara HaMishtadel, that is attempting to weaken every person in the fulfillment of their shlichus. In words, Be'esis HaMasim es l'muhus HaShliach. The Yetzer Hara is a chacham, so he finds a melech zoken uchsil, as the Rebbe says in many other places, and he finds different ways fitting to the person what will weaken him. He says, you do the Pisgam, the statement from my Shver, from the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Chassidus and Chassidus accomplished that no one is alone. Wherever you are, and these I'm reading the exact basis, Vu migefinzer sein do Rabbeim. Wherever you are, there's the Rabbeim. Ubefrat, especially regarding the Frierdiker Rebbe, because he himself wrote regarding when his father passed away, the Rebbe Rashab, that Rei Yisrael leyazav esem marusam, that the shepherds do not forsake, and do not abandon their sheep. He explains in Geras HaKedesh Simon Chav Zayin that on the contrary, now the Hagbolas, the physical limitations, were removed. So the Rabbeim are with us, every one of us, all those that makusha to them, b'chol makom shem, in every place that they are, especially in the places where they were sent on a shlichus to fulfill their shlichus. And specifically, even more so, if the shlichus is lahafitz hamayonis chutza, to spread the mayonis to the Baal Shem Tov, to the outer world. And this is hagdome to be a Mashiach and tchias hamesim v'kitzav ram nesheich neyofer v'hu b'seichem. And the Rebbe refers to a sikha from Yud Tammuz Tovshin Yud. You can get much strength from there, and chizuk and reinforcement. That you could also establish, the Rebbe writes, that even Seichel Anushi can understand, even human logic, even human rationale can understand that there's no space, there's no room to say that a person is alone, God forbid. And definitely no room that you should weaken your Aveda. Halavai, the Rebbe writes, and Halavai it should be that though that medagdik manash or befrat atmimim, that anash and especially the tmimim should be focusing on the sichas of that year of Toshin Yud and the year before it. So that's one letter. Another settle, which was in the summer of that summer of Toshin Yud as well. Let me read to you. Again, I'll translate. All these arguments and so-called excuses why you're not doing things. So even if it's bothered, even if you want to say that it's clear that it's not coming from the chashash that's brought in the sikha that the Rebbe refers to there, that maybe it's coming from the kluginke, which is the Yetzer Hara again, and the Rebbe refers to the sikha Porim Tovshin Tes and Hayem Yem, the end of page 64. All this is relevant to to a debate with Malach Michal, who's the Sar, who's the minister who represents Israel, and Melamed Zchus Aleim, and is always finding merit. But the bottom line is that the inyan is missing. So with all the excuses, the action is missing, who does it help? And the Rebbe writes, Kach Shamaiti, that's how I heard from the Frierdiker Rebbe, from my Shver, for several years, an answer to people who had tinus like you did. That this is a good thing for Malach Michal to go find Malimut Zchus, whether you're entitled or not entitled, but the bottom line is missing the actions. And the Rebbe continues on to speak about the importance to realize that the biggest chus a person has is to be connected to the Rebbe through his work and through his shlichus. When a person is connected to that connection never disappears. Because you're connecting to an etzem, as the Rebbe says, an etzem kshatevus b'miktsasei. When you grasp even a part of it, you grasp the entire thing. The fact that we do not see it with our naked eyes does not take away from the reality. And all the arguments that you may have are all connected to seichel and logic. And now we need to have, the Rebbe brings from the Maimon and Tovshin Tes, Aveda de Netzach and Heid, that's Megal the Etzem Lamata Lamaila. We need now an Aveda that is not bound by logic and by feelings, but by total commitment and total dedication. as he explains in the Maimer Kol Deidi Tovshin Tes, referring to these questions and these tainas. So these are just two among many of different answers that we can read, but I want to just elaborate on them. I believe they're also hinted to, maybe more than hinted to, in the parshas that we are in right now. So Gimmel Tammuz happened, B'tzai Shabbos, it was Parsha Keirach, and they're going into Parsha Chukas. As we discussed in the previous weeks, the theme of all these parshas is, starting from Baalei Teshuva, the theme of the Rebbe's foundation of his entire leadership, Aveda b'koyach atzmei, shalheves elam elah, that we have to rise on our own. The flame is lit by the Kohen Gadol, gives us the strengths, but there's a point where you have to rise on your own and demonstrate what can you do when you're not being held by the hand, your so-called effort, initiative on your part. That's Baalei Teshuva. Comes next week, Shlach l'chol l'daitecha. As we discussed last week, l'daitecha, that itself is the command, that this has to be according to your das. God forbid that God was telling him, do it where you understand that goes against me. Ani lemitzah, I don't command you. You have to do it l'daitecha. That's the shlichus. Shlach has to go with l'daitecha. But that itself we know is coming from the power of the Rebbe, from the power of the command that the Rebbe himself says, I wanted you to do it on your end. Purim Tov Shemem Zayin, Chav Ches Nisan Tov Shenun Aleph. And as I said, the central theme of the Rebbe's Nesias, the Rebbe's leadership, was L'daitecha, Shalheves Elam Elah. The Meraglim made the mistake. They thought the Daitecha means we really want your opinion. That was not the kavanah. The kavanah was we want your opinion of how to accomplish it. You go and check it out, scout out the land, and come back how, but not to get involved in whether to do it or not to do it. Had they had that hiskashus and they understood that you have to use l'daitecha, like we spoke the story from Aaron Belinitzer, that his das itself should be aligned with the Rebbe wants, then they would have fulfilled the kavanah. The mistake they made was they thought l'daitecha means we're on our own. And they forgot there's a Rebbe. Two of the scouts did not. Yeshua, who was of course the dedicated Talmud, L'yomish Metecha Eil, who never separated himself from his Rebbe, from Moshe Rabbeinu, and Kolov, who went to the Maris HaMachpelah to connect himself to the Ovis, to the Imois, to make sure he does not waver. Mitzugibun Neben, you're bound above, you don't fall below. Then comes the next week, Parsha Keirach. The week we're coming to this coming Shabbos, which is this year, Gimmel Tammuz, will be Shabbos. What does Keirach come and say? Madua tisnasu. What do we need a Rebbe for altogether? He basically took what the Meraglim said and took it to the further extent. The Meraglim, their argument was that they want to have spirituality, as Chassidus explained in many of Sikhs. They wanted to stay in the oasis, in the womb of the Midbar. They don't want to deal with materialism. And therefore, they defied what their Rebbe told them to do, which is that we have to go into Eretz Yisrael, as the Eibishter told us to do, conquer the land, transform it, not to become frightened by it. So their me'ila b'shlichusam, meaning that their mutiny was for the reasons of spiritual reason. Keirach comes and says, oh, the kavanah is Eretz, to go into the land, as the Rebbe explains in Sichos. Everybody's holy. Everybody. What do we need a Rebbe for altogether? Madua tisnasu. Kol ha'edek deshim hem. The whole nation, the whole community is holy. As the Rebbe explains in a number of sichos. So Keirach also mutinied, but he went even further. His was, we can take care of ourselves in this world without a Rebbe. And of course we know the tragic consequences that came out of that. Eretz Echeles Yishveh. That's exactly what happened. Keirach and Nedoseh and his cohorts were swallowed up by the earth that they felt they can accomplish on their own. So what the Meraglim said, Eretz Echeles Yishveh, actually happened specifically to Keirach. All this teaches us that what? That yes, we have l'daitecha and we're given that work to do it at our initiative, which after Gimmel Tammuz is very obvious that that's what our mission is right now. But we should never forget that Rebbe is always with us. When the Radats heard Simchas Torah, Tov Reish Mem Gimel, when news came They were dancing in Simchas Torah by a kofis, and he heard that the Rebbe Marash was nostalgic. He fainted in the middle of the dancing, and no one could revive him. The stalkus was Yud Gimmel Tishrei, right before Sukkot, and the news didn't come there till middle of Simchas Torah. They called his father, and his father went down and whispered to him, and that's what revived him. What did he whisper? As a Rebbe get kem l'shtavek. There's no such thing as a Rebbe get tavek. The fact that we don't see doesn't mean anything. We don't see what's on the other side of the curtain. So the Rebbe is with us without a question. But he's with us now only if you connect yourself to his work. When the Rebbe is here, Begashmi, is you can go over and see him physically. Now, the only way to connect is through doing the work of the Rebbe. And in that sense, we continue to get all the strengths and all the powers that we need. But we have the challenge that now the L'daitecha and the Shalhevas Elam Elah is very obvious. In a sad way, which none of us wanted. The Rebbe's words, Chav Ches Nissen, were fulfilled literally. Ich getan alt, I did everything, and now do what you can do. So this is an unprecedented time in history, where we physically perhaps cannot see the Rebbe, but we're given and charged with a mission. And there's nowhere Aveda B'Kei Chatzmei more than after Gimmel Tammuz, like some of the people wrote here, 21 years where there are people already turning into adults that have never seen the Rebbe. What more Aveda B'Kei Chatzmei? So we can look at it as a sad and melancholy moment and just say, I don't know what to do, and throw up our hands. Or we can say, that's the challenge of our time. And history will judge us by how we behave now. Because this is the real stakes. The Rebbe lifted everybody up before Gimmel Tammuz on his wings. Simchas Torah, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, every day, Shabbos, Fabrengens, Mincha Ma'ariv every day, and so on. The Rebbe lifted us up. Obviously, then was also required an effort on our part. Even Etzbek Tana, as the Rebbe often would say, one little finger. However, there, the Rebbe lifted up. Now, it has to come from within. And we should never think for a moment that this is also not coming from the keiches of the Rebbe. The Rebbe said this is exactly what it will be. L'daitecha, shalhevas elam elah. We had hoped that it wouldn't have to be in this fashion, but it is right now. So, as adults, as chassidim, as shluchim and shluchas of the Rebbe, we don't have another option except to take the bull by the horns and say ourselves, this is the challenge of our time. We do not understand why. We would have preferred it wouldn't have been a Gimmel Tammuz altogether. But what other option do we have except to say this is now the ultimate Aveda B'Kei Chatzmei? Still with the keiches, and not be deceived. We're not doing it on our own. We're doing it because that's what we were told to do. And as dedicated soldiers, you do what you're told to do. You don't ask questions. You want to discuss it, we can fabring and questions. They had questions they hin, like the Rebbe says. What bottom line is, who has any benefit from the questions and answers? So, to ask questions and not do anything is unacceptable. You want to ask questions and act, and while you're asking, fine. The bottom line is that we have now a challenge that's unprecedented. Unprecedented the 7 generations of Chassidus Chabad, unprecedented the 9 generations of Chassidus Bechlal, maybe unprecedented throughout history, that we don't physically see our Rebbe. But we have our work cut out for us. We were given all the tools, the sichos, the maimorim, all the tools. And there's no excuse because we have the freedom today. We don't have oppression, thank God. We do not have discrimination or other forces that don't allow us. Today, the only enemy is within our own hearts and souls. So our challenge as we enter Gimmel Tammuz, this period, is to take the lesson of Baalei Teshuva and the lesson even from Kerach. We do need a Rebbe. Even when we do the work on our own and we're given the strength, it's still with the connection of the Rebbe within that part. And then that leads into chukas. And chukas is what? Hara metumas mes. What's tumas mes? The separation between body and soul, the separation between matter and spirit, where in our eyes we don't see the seamless flow between the ruchnius and gashmius, between a Rebbe beruchnius and begashmius. And chukas is the tikkun that repairs that Chassidus explains in Rotzi V'Shuv of the Efer Hapora, that you mix it with the Mayim Chaim, that when a person connects with a passion and with a dedication, as the Rebbe said, Netzach and Hoid of our times, they can revive even that disconnect, that temporary disconnect between a period of neshama and a guf. So when you look at it, the sequence of the parshas, it literally is the story of what we're dealing with in Gimmel Tammuz. Mamish the Rebbe's themes, all become so prominent after Gimmel Tammuz, and then the challenge. Do you forget your Rebbe or do you not forget your Rebbe? A Rebbe does not leave us. We, God forbid, can leave him. And then, of course, what can he do? So we have our work cut out for us. This is the challenge that we have to share with each other, and the strength that we have to share with each other to overcome this difficulty, and recognize that if you instill people with the spirit, with the teachings, with the passion, because all those teachings are as relevant today as they were then, even more so, and it's a matter of being passionate about it, excited about it, committed to it, and that's what rubs off, that's what will affect others. Obviously, if you yourself are going to have a very mediocre and lackadaisical attitude to the whole thing, what kind of impact will it have on our children and everyone else? So those of us who have been inspired and are inspired have a responsibility more than ever before to fill that so-called void by showing that we're doing everything possible with our Aveda B'Keich Atzmi, with our effort, our initiative, our proactive behavior to do what it takes to be able to fulfill the shlichus of the Rebbe, each one in our own possible way. And we'll definitely have voices inside of us that will try to weaken us, but that's why we give each other strength, and that's why we gather strength from the things we read and the things we learn. And ultimately comes down today, it's a direct connection to the ruchnis of the Rebbe, to his message, to his Torah, to his Aveda, and to the Ma'aseh B'Peil that the Rebbe demanded and requested of us all. A central theme of the Rebbe's was, whenever there's a challenge, we always have the ability, no matter what happens, Ein mevakesh el lefikechon. The Rebbe refused, which means that we're not asked to do something unless we were given the power to deal with it. And the Rebbe refused to accept, in any given situation, that something is hopeless. I've shared this story, and I'll just share it again. I remember when my father was in the hospital. He had a stroke, Rosh Hashanah, Tov Shinun, and Yom Kippur. He was in the hospital. I went by the Rebbe to get lekach for my father, and the Rebbe gave me lekach and said to me, tell your father that when he finishes the shlichus there, he'll be released. I told my father, after Yom Kippur, just to show it wasn't just a line, Rabbi Chadikov came to see my father, and the Rebbe wants to know, he said, whether you already finished your shlichus here. And my father did his things that he had to do, and he finally did finish, and he was released. Can you imagine here, my father had a stroke. Any person is going to say the ostensible reason you're in the hospital is because of a stroke. But the Rebbe, there was no such thing. You're there for a reason. When you finish the reason, the physical reasons, the health reasons will disappear. This is a lesson for us today as well. Again, we do not know the reasons for everything, but one thing is clear. Today we have that challenge. What will you do when, so to speak, you can convince yourself that Rebbe is not watching you? It's very easy to convince ourselves today. It was always easy when you wanted to, Yitzhak could always convince someone, but today it's even more so. What will you do? And the answer has to be the unequivocal answer that Rebbe gave us in different difficult situations and said, you're there for a reason. Will you fulfill your shlichus in this situation? Or are you going to say, now I can't, God forbid. I hope this was sufficient. Sufficient. I think we could talk about this forever, but I want to move on to some other topics. I can't say move on, because all these topics that we discuss are all in the spirit of Chassidus Applied. And let's talk about some topics that I was going to speak about in the previous weeks, but didn't end up having time to do so. So let's begin with the issue of dating. Now, the segue may sound a little strange, but the segue is ultimately everything that we discuss here is an attempt to take Chassidus and the Rebbeim's and the Rebbe's haras and directives toward life. So what I'm doing now is exactly in the spirit what I just elaborated on, which is the whole underlying mission of MyLife Chassidus Applied, is to take the Rebbe's ideas and make them alive today and relevant today as ever before. So whatever topic it may be, the point is relevance. So we've received over the months many, many questions about the issue of dating. So I want to just address some of them, some dating tips, so to speak. And what better nachas to give the Rebbe in a time like this is to build, to find your soulmate and to build a binyan adeyad al yisei Torah mitzvahs as it's illuminated by Chassidus. But the way to get there is by having a Chassidic attitude and what dating is in general. So let me just say a few words about it, and then I'll address a few questions that came in about this topic. Everything in life is about focus. Whether it's lahavdili dealing with a business, starting a business, or starting any project, you have to have a mission statement. What is the objective that you want to achieve? You have a meeting, it's always important. What's your agenda? If you don't want to waste time and go in all different directions scattered, you have to have that laser beam type of focus and intensity. What is it we want to accomplish? So when it comes to marriage and it comes to relationships, the same question has to be asked. We have many things going on in our lives. We may be working and making money. We may be studying. We may be a student in yeshiva. We may be a girl in her school. Maybe something in between, a job. We have all kinds of things going on in our lives. We have our social lives. But at the end of the day, what is the focus? What is the focus? Dating is a direct outgrowth of a person's personal and spiritual and psychological focus. Now, in the simplest of terms, you look in the Dirah and Chassidus, it tells you what the focus is. The focus is that God created the human being. He sent your soul down to earth with a mission. To fulfill that mission in its entirety, in making a Dirah b'tachtenim, you have your first decade, a few decades of your life, a couple of decades, 20 years, let's say, of a person's life, give and take, to build your resources, to build yourself and turn into a mature, fine young man or young woman. And then comes the time that to fulfill that shlichus, that mission of transforming your corner of the world into making it a divine garden, a divine home, you do it with an Ezer Kenegde, two partners, Zachar Nekeva Bara Esam. The Torah puts it succinctly, male and female. God created the human being in the divine image. It's male and female. And it's only when these two come together that a family can be built. Children are born, all under the sanctity of a kedushin, of a male and female returning to their original unity, a reunion, to fulfill their mission in life. Now, if it was that simple, that was the focus, most people would not have any issues. Now you have to find what is the proper soulmate that will help you fulfill the shlichus, both for man and both for a woman. The problem is, many of us have been programmed and indoctrinated and shaped by all kinds of attitudes, some of them healthy and some of them not healthy. And often you have to figure out what are the healthy ones, what are the not healthy ones. Because you definitely don't want to make a major decision like marriage without knowing that you're not being influenced by forces or voices that are not necessarily in your benefit. Now, that's where it gets complicated, because we're subjective human beings. And sometimes what we think is a priority may not be such a priority. And that's why we need to have good advisors, friends, family, and others that can put our head straight if we need it, that we have some objectivity. So I can't speak for everybody, because everybody is in a different situation, and it's always case by case. But if we're able to speak about it in some type of global sense, the first thing is, obviously, is your head and your heart in the right place? Are you focused the way you should be focused? And you have to ask yourself the question and have people that you trust help you answer that question. Because if you're not focused, then we have to have the one approach, which is how do you get yourself focused. If you are focused, then the question is, what exactly are the criteria you need in a given situation to find the right partner? But I find that in many of the counseling I do, many people I meet, the people struggle with, very often it's scattered. The focus is not there. And they, from whatever reason it may be, some people put too much focus on the physical, some put too much focus on the financial. The Torah wants a person to find someone that's appealing to you physically, emotionally, intellectually, but above all spiritually, where you share a vision together, where you share a mission together that's more than just something that's comfortable, something that is cause-driven, something that fulfills the purpose of your souls coming down to this earth. Now, if someone relates to that, and they look for someone else who relates to that, the dating process will be a lot simpler. If you don't relate to what I just said, that doesn't mean that, God forbid, there's no hope. It means you may need to talk to someone who can help distinguish between the means and the end, and what's a primary thing and what's a secondary factor. Further than that, it requires customizing this to each individual. So I recommend talking to someone you trust. Don't just rely on your own instincts, especially if if dating comes difficult. You have to be able to look at yourself very brutally, because you don't want to find out that you're part of the problem. It's easy to turn everyone into scapegoats. Others, it's the girl, it's the boy, it's the family, it's the shatchanim, and so on. And I'm not suggesting everything is perfect, but ultimately you're responsible for your own life. And it's critical that you take that attitude. And just for the record, the Rebbe says in a number of places that when it comes to dating, you need the shlach l'chol l'daitecha, very much so, because you need your sensibilities, your feelings, your attitude, and your mind, but that too is blessed. Because if you go with the attitude, knowing that you want to fulfill what the shlichus of your shlichus in this world is, then you have your attitude, your personal opinions will be infused with that type of strength, as we discussed earlier. So with that said, let me move over to a few questions on this topic. Hi Rabbi, I'm interested in learning more about dating between the sects. Did the Rebbe have anything to say about this seemingly social issue? For example, as a convert who has recently started dating, I've been getting set up with other gerim from all walks of life, including non-Chassidim. It's a very raw question because it's a very new situation, but I want to know if the Rebbe brought down an opinion regarding dating non-Lubavitchers, the issue of a Baalei Teshuva's dating in general. Okay, so I'm going to address some questions that are not necessarily the usual, because I like to also cover for those that are in these given situations. And this is a situation where two people are not necessarily come from the same community or the same background. It could be, as the person writes, about a convert, a ger. It can be a Baalei Teshuva. And in general, or it can be, should someone that's a Lubavitcher Chassid look for someone that's not a Lubavitcher Chassid? Look in that direction. Again, these are all, everything I say here has its exceptions. But overall, when it comes to dating, kosher zivugan kekriyas yamsuf, bringing a male and female together that come from two different families and two different backgrounds, even if it's from the same community, is itself difficult. Obviously, when you add more factors, it gets more complicated. This doesn't mean that there aren't beautiful marriages, and there could be beautiful marriages to people from very different persuasions. But generally speaking, someone who grew up with a certain philosophical approach to Torah and Chassidus, it's probably easier to find someone that has a similar philosophical approach. If that doesn't work, that doesn't mean you shouldn't look outward, but you probably want to find someone that's at least in the same ballpark. And it's not about who's right and wrong. It's just now a matter of compatibility. You know, the Eibishter made nada pashta. There are different approaches. Ein day saying shavas. There are different ways of different temperaments and so on. So it's true that a Baalei Teshuva could definitely marry, I don't call it a tzaddik, a Baalei Teshuva marrying a Baalei Avera, maybe that's the way it should be said. But I mean really a Baalei Teshuva marrying what they call an FFB, someone that did not come from a secular background. I've seen marriages that are very successful because they have their foundations there and they have the connection that has been made. Is it easier for two people who come from a background that grew up not in a Shomer Shabbos home, let's put it that way? Yeah, it may be. But this again is case by case and no one can make a statement. Unfortunately, some people who grow up or converts or have challenging backgrounds or difficult backgrounds or ones that people find uncomfortable with can find it more difficult the dating process, and we have to talk about it openly. But that's why we need to be able to be Chassidish Yidden who look at a person not for their background and not for the past. As the Rebbe said a number of times, every Jew has the best possible background of Ben Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. We're all children of the greatest. And there you need to have wise people who are sensitive to try to find the right type of matches. I mean, I would suggest if someone who's growing up and appreciates Chassidus, the Rebbe, and so on, try to find someone who also appreciates Chassidus and the Rebbe. It's going to be difficult with other difficulties to have that difference as well. Because there you have some type of philosophical foundation and basis for the relationship. Beyond that, I will move on to the next question. Hi Rabbi, can you please shed some light on the do's and don'ts of dating a guy or a woman younger than oneself? Is there a limit in terms of age difference? I know it happens. I'm just wondering what the Torah and Chassidus has to say on the matter. So age differences. What I've seen from the Rebbe in notes in Setlach, the Rebbe wrote one place I saw that more than 10-year difference should not be pursued. The maximum should be 10 years. I did see in other places different amounts. If anybody has more information on this and has some Setlach that I may not have seen, please share them. But the bottom line is, a completely more than 10 years simply really means 2 generations. It's almost old enough to be your child. And therefore then you get into a whole new series of complications because you're focusing on what? A person who's, let's say, 40, marrying someone that's 20, Just let's be practical. A person 40 and 20 are very, very different in their lives. Even if you're 20 years old in spirit, and even if you've never been married, it's just two different realities. And that's why it's usually not a good idea. Why do I say usually? Because I'm not ready to say 100% impossible, but based on the Rebbe's directive, he's saying not to pursue that, so let's go with that. It's a good directive, and let's stick with that. 10 years is the maximum. Obviously, try to do it a little less. The 5 years is absolutely acceptable. 7 years is acceptable. This goes both ways. Sometimes the woman older than the man, sometimes the man older than the woman. I know there are taboos and there are stereotypes that people have around this. But let's go beyond that to Dirah Chassidus. Dirah Chassidus is looking to find compatibility, that the marriage should work well. And if you go beyond physical attraction, like someone say, if she or he's attractive, I don't mind if they're 5, 7, 10 years older than I am. It's not a good enough reason. It has to be based on a deeper connection. I've seen marriages, beautiful marriages, you never would imagine. A woman, for example, lost her husband tragically, has a bunch of babies, and the guy's a single guy, never married before. So usually you would not want to match those two up because it's just different realities. Both have children from a previous marriage, whether it was due to, God forbid, death or divorce, is more compatible. But it has worked, and it could work. And we shouldn't get involved in God's mysterious ways. Obviously, we use our daitacha, our logic and understanding to try to match people in the best possible way. But there's always a possibility that certain things will work. So I wouldn't rule anything out ever, even though you try to lean towards the most commonalities that two people may have in age and persuasion and other things that we've discussed. Could you please elaborate, another question, on the subject of reference checking? I would like a proper guidance into how to present questions and get a clearer picture. Usually I find myself seeing that always people are kind, Chassidish, Yireh Shamayim. So I want to know how to direct questions in order to find out the essential information for real. In other words, not looking at the externals. Look, reference is, at the end of the day, has to come down to people you trust. People you trust. Because if someone you don't trust, someone just comes and tells you, most people are not going to want to say bad things and negative things, and maybe they shouldn't. So you have to have someone you trust that knows the person. That's the best. That's where you'll find very often brothers and sisters can shed light because they went to school with the potential, with the prospect, or they know them other ways. So references is not just about a list on paper or what people say about people. On paper and resumes, people can write whatever they want to write. Not saying necessarily they're distorting things, but it's not necessarily a 100% foolproof method. It's finding a reference, finding someone you trust that can do some real research if necessary and ask people until you find someone that knows the person well. Now, I know it's not always that easy to do that, but that's really the answer to this question. And I have nothing more to say right now on that topic. Okay. Let's move on to Lashon hara. Lashon hara. Okay. So I want to read, because I spoke very briefly last week, so left a little confusion in some people's minds. And I want to read a question that really focused on why it's not such a good idea often to just say things briefly and not elaborate properly. Let me just pull my thing. Okay. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, thank you for your life-saving work. In response to your preliminary coverage on the issue of Lashon hara on MyLife episode 70, please clarify the following 3 points. So this is a very good letter that will help me focus and define exactly. That's why I'm reading this one first. That was my addition. Number 1, I did not understand what lesson you meant to convey by telling the story about the conversation between the Rebbe Rashab and a rabbi that asked him why some Chassidim are not careful about Lashon hara. The Rebbe Rashab was quoted, Lashon hara retzach, as if to say it is just talk as opposed to cutting beards, which is an action. How do we reconcile the statement with the principles taught in Sanhedrin that speech is regarded as an action, akimus svosav hava maisa? Was the Rebbe Rashab's response meant to defend Chassidim, to have the rabbi consider the behavior of his own flock, or to emphasize deed as a priority over speech for Chassidim as well? I'm concerned that people might underestimate the gravity of Lashon hara from this story, considering the destruction of Lashon hara can cause to families, their livelihoods, and even their lives, not to mention to entire communities, or our people as a whole, as in the Churban related in Gittin. Please clarify what lesson we as Chassidim should take from the Rebbe Rashab's conversation. 2. You suggested the Lashon hara may be symptomatic of a deeper soul malady. I understand that Lashon hara will be less of an issue when we become passionate about positive matters, especially when Chassidus becomes relevant in our lives. Dealing with the core issue, however, does not rule out the need to treat the symptom, as is evident in many medical and clinical conditions. In the case of alcoholism, for example, it is imperative to treat the symptoms, for example, stop imbibing alcohol, at the same time that the core issue is dealt with, for example, the emotional disturbances underlying the alcohol abuse. Dr. Harry Thibault, that's a quote from him. If the alcoholic doesn't stop drinking or doesn't understand that not only hard drinks but also beer and wine contain alcohol, all the therapy in the world won't stop him from getting drunk. In the case of Lashon hara, one can commit the transgression, hurting others, even while spiritually passionate. For example, many people do not realize that even true statements can be Lashon hara, that criticizing a shir is Lashon hara, or that saying a negative statement about a community as a whole without mentioning any names is a serious offense of Lashon hara. Quoting the Sefer of Chafetz Chaim. I recently learned the sikha from the Rebbe, Chilik 27, Chav Zayin, Pasha Semer, pages 162 to 165, that discusses the terrible spiritual effects of Lashon hara, even on the person about whom it is spoken, and conversely, the positive spiritual effects of judging one's fellow favorably. For example, the speech of a Talmid Chacham as cited in Rambam, who doesn't speak about his fellow negatively at all, even in the rare case in which it might be permissible. As an aside, since you mentioned that speech is an outgrowth of thought, the halacha Sefer Chafetz Chaim also deals with certain halachas of machshava, thought, such as the requirement to judge favorably in the vast majority of cases and their prohibition of even believing gossip. Why shouldn't we treat the symptom by studying the laws of proper speech? For example, the halacha Sefer Chafetz Chaim, not to be confused with his Musa Sefer Shmiras HaLashon. In addition to our primary focus of learning Chassidus. 3. Lastly, please forgive me if I'm being too blockheaded or literal, reading too much into your statements, but I heard at about 54:05 on the YouTube recording of episode 70 the following. Number 1, absolutely Lashon hara is an Isser Daraisa in many opinions. Isn't Lashon hara an Isser of Daraisa according to all opinions? Also, aren't there 31 mitzvahs, not just one Isser, that may be violated when a person speaks Lashon hara? Hagdama of the Sefer Chafetz Chaim. Please clarify. Thank you. Your help is most appreciated. Blessings for continued success in your shlichus from strength to strength. Sincerely. Okay, I'm very glad that you spelled it all out, because this is one of the downsides when you try to cover something very briefly and not address it fully. So let me begin absolutely right. Lashon hara is a Isur Daraisa. And when I said many opinions, I did not mean many opinions about Lashon hara being a Isur Daraisa. I meant there are aspects, and I was alluding to the difference between Moitze Shemra and Lashon hara and certain elements of Lashon hara. For example, the idea of saying a compliment, talking about somebody more than excessively. Some places it says that's also Isur Daraisa. Some say that's not Isur Daraisa, that's more of a siyag. By spoken too much, even positively, will lead person to Lashon hara. So I was alluding to the different opinions on the extent, not God forbid, that Lashon hara anyone holds is not. There's clear psukim in the Torah that state clearly that one should not, Lashon hara is accurately stated, is not just saying an untruth about someone, that's Moitze Shemra. Lashon hara is even when something true, and Lashon hara is just speaking about another person. So let's make it very clear, this is not a Chafetz Chaim or non-Chafetz Chaim approach, this is a Isur Daraisa in Torah. You have many, and you see from the Rebbe, the careful way of speaking about people, not even wanting to hear other people speak negatively about someone. So this is a foundation in Torah and Chassidus without a question, without a matter of Chassidim versus non-Chassidim and so on and so forth. The question about emphasis and the question of how to deal with Lashon hara, there you're going to find different approaches. So let's go back to the story of the Rebbe Rashab that I quoted. The story goes like this. I don't know if there's an actual printed source from the Rabbeim, but I believe it's brought in different places from Chassidim, that the Rebbe Rashab was asked, some say the Chafetz Chaim himself and some say others, and asked why that in the Temchet Mimim, in the Baalei Teshuva, there's focus on not focus on Shmiras HaLashon, in other words, being taught that, and instead, there's focus on not cutting beards is a far bigger focus. Whereas not cutting beard can be seen in some interpretations as there are heterim. Obviously, it's some Chassidic's opinion, and many opinions it's not that way. Whereas Lashon hara is a clear issue daraisa. So the Rebbe Rashab answered that Lashon hara, and I should misquoted a bit, or maybe I may have said it too briefly. Lashon hara, no one gets up in the morning to go ahead and say, I'm going to speak Lashon hara today. So it comes while a person is speaking, whereas cutting a beard is an action that you have to sit down and plan and go ahead and do it. So the koch, therefore, is on trying to get the bochnim not to do something like that. Obviously, doing everything possible to stop them and refrain from speaking Lashon hara is critical. But that just explains how you focus on one. But if you really think of the story a little deeper, it really goes down to there's another story they say about Isaac, the Itcha the Masmid, I should say, Itcha the Masmid, that when the Chofetz Chaim came out of the Sefer, he said that what he meant to say, there's two ways you can focus on helping people avoid Lashon hara. One is a Musadik approach, which is talk how bad it is and all its the negative impact. And that's also mentioned. Now let's not forget the Hayem Yem of Yud Gimmel Cheshvan, the Katlet Lisoi, that Lashon hara kills the speaker of Lashon hara, the listener, and even the person who's being spoken about. That's a strong statement. And some places it says it's worse than all the three Avedas of Yareg Val Yavin. And yet, the focus can be not so much on all the bad elements of Lashon hara, but to focus on the beauty of the Neshama Va'idin. And when a person appreciates every Jew, for that matter, every human being, and have a shval ruach b'fnei kol adam, v'nafshi kafel ha'kel tiyeh, and you have that bittul, then b'meila you're going to be very careful. It's almost like similar to the difference when we talked about Chassidus and Musa, where you have the focus going to be on shiflus ha'adam, how lowly a human being can fall, or on Rema Masakel, how great God is, or how great the Neshama is. As the Rebbe says in Sichos, when you talk to someone, you say to them, you're going to burn in hell for doing this. Or you tell them, look how great your Neshama is. And how embarrassing it is that you're not living up to your potential, where it will be more motivating. So though it's correct that we have in the Torah, there's focus at times at the onshim, the punishments, or the negative effects, and the Chofetz Chaim does a brilliant job in capturing that, it could well be that the Rebbe Rashab was alluding to saying, not God forbid that we have less focus on it. We have focus on making sure a bacher does not do any act. And that which is, when it just comes, is not because it's lax, is our approaches by teaching people the power of a hadras ponim zoken, the power of the neshama, the power of the gedusha saguf, the gedusha saneshama, and about how every Jew is choviv, is tired, is precious by God. That is the best preventive medicine. Now, we don't have a lot from the Rabbeim in the exact methods, but it's clearly that Lashon hara is absolutely unequivocally unacceptable. So the Rebbe Rashab's story cannot be in any way suggesting that this is something, so that's so merely it's fine. That's not the point. The point is, what are you focusing on? When you're speaking to Bachim, you're focusing on something that they should not actively go do something that is desecrating. As far as the other questions, look, we only go with what we have, what the Rabbeim taught us about how to approach things. I'm just looking at the other questions that you asked about this. Yes, the soul malady. It's correct that there are two elements to it. There's the symptoms and there's the deeper fact. Listen, we talk about the Mitzvah as a result of his Lashon hara. He was chattering or twittering and about others, and that's why, as a Mitzvah, that's why the tikkun is with the tzipur, because tzipur is a chit-chatter, so that's a tikkun for his chit-chattering. So, and clearly Mitzvah would talk about it as a spiritual malady, not in our times. So the idea of Lashon hara is definitely not just to prevent yourself from speaking badly, it's usually driven by deeper causes and effects. But like any type of medicine, there's symptomatic medicine and there's remedial medicine. There's preventive medicine. There's symptomatic, needs to be done, you need to take an aspirin to get rid of the immediate issue. But ultimately, if you want to get a person to stop being capable of speaking negatively about others, you got to change their mindset. There has to be a cognitive and emotional reconditioning, and behavioral reconditioning. That does not preclude the fact that we can teach our people just not to speak negatively. But like the Alter Rebbe speaks about the Gana, if you can teach a Gana, put him behind bars, or tie up his hands, and he couldn't steal, or you rehabilitate him to the point that he will never steal again. And this goes back again to the approach why perhaps we did not, in Simchat Mimim, not embrace learning the Svarim does the negative, because the point is to teach the positive. Now the fact that it's not being taught properly or it's not having its effect, that's just because it's not being done right. But the approach should be, is why we should fundamentally not even engage. When a person is not a petty person and they're focusing on neshama things, on soulful things, and on the cause and mission why we're here in this world, automatically they speak differently. Who usually are slanderers, gossipers, are people who are litigators, who have nothing to talk about. Their lives are controlled by mediocrity or other day-to-day pedestrian matters, and therefore it's easy for them to fall into that trap. I'm not suggesting that people who are scholars and righteous people can't, because Lashon hara is everyone's possible. But if you can recondition a person that their mind and their heart is engaged with Chassidic inyanim, and especially with helping change other people, but derech mamela, that's the best type of preventive medicine. But it has to be stated also that we're not just talking about going and working on your soul. It has to be expressed that you shouldn't just be a soulful person, but it should not in any way contradict how your machshava dibur ma'aseh. Because the Alter Rebbe says in the Geras HaKodesh Chav Beis that even machshava, a negative thought about somebody, is already in the category of Lashon hara, the way that Alter Rebbe says it. I should also quote the Nayem Yem Yud Ches Kislev. He also talks there about that you have to feel bad when a person speaks negative, because if it's true, you have to feel bad for the person that you're speaking about, and if it's not true, you have to feel bad for the person that's doing the speaking and what kind of a madrega they fell to, how low they stooped. So, bottom line is, it is absolutely a lot less of a emphasis among Chassidic kreisen. It's just a question of how you deal with it. And the dealing with it is one that is much more connected to, as I said, focusing on b'chlal speaking holy things, shmiras haloshen, in the sense of speaking kedusha and only speaking positively, finding qualities in others, not being judgmental, which automatically is the best preventive for Lashon hara. But at the same time, we also have to know its impact, and that's why the Gemara talks about it. And there's no question that knowing about its negative effects, it can definitely be a great deterrent. I just wanted to put the whole thing in context. Because time is limited, I'll address this more questions on this in future episodes, and I want to continue now with, what else do we have to cover before the essays? Okay, there was more talk about the yeshiva system, and there's plenty to say about that, but I will also move that to the following episodes, because I want to go back to the Gimmel Tammuz. We still have to talk about that recording that I played, and I want to go through the 3 essays of this week. So let's do the essays. Let's do that right now. And the rest of the stuff, there's always future weeks. Okay, yeah, plenty to read about. So we're going to do now 3 essays, and then we're going to go back to the surprise of the recording, and you'll be very pleasantly surprised if you hear what it is. Quite unique. So don't go away. 3 essays. First essay is The Power of Speech by Shlomi Neparstik, age 19. A bocher in Temchet Mimim, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. That's very impressive, that age. Now, what does he write about? Let me just give you an overview and then refer you to where you can read about it more in detail. Power of speech. The importance of the power of speech in everyday life in the light of Chabad Chassidus. So, this young man, the Shlomi begins, man was gifted with the power of speech. For many, it seems to be a relatively insignificant tool bestowed within us. And he goes on to make a case that seemingly speech shouldn't be that significant. And yet, Chassidus turns it into a whole force in life. Because you could think speech, as he puts it, why should that really be that important? How much does it really add to our existence? All you're doing is just expressing something you have inside. So it seems to be a very seemingly superficial force. And he goes on to bring several life scenarios of individuals who actually withdrew into their own personal lives because they didn't pay much attention in communicating with others and so on. I won't go over, you can read that yourself in the full essay. And after making a case where speech may seem to be insignificant, He brings from Chassidus, from Ranat, and of course the Sikha from the Rebbe Yisrei Chelik Vov, that when we call the medaber, that speech is actually the expression of the etzem of a person. Human beings are defined as medaber, speakers. What is the power of speech? Speech is not an external power. Many people may think it's an external power. Unlike the emotional intellect, the speech's job is to express that which is within. Words have no content of their own. Rather, their whole existence is to export what the emotion or the mind has to say. This is the case before Chassidus. Speech then is seen basically as a solely external tool to reveal that which would otherwise be concealed. However, when you learn Chassidus, the exact opposite is true. Speech allows us to transcend ourselves and to reach into another human being. And he elaborates on this power and really does a nice job of showing a chidduch in Chassidus and applying it to our lives and how we speak. And of course, it's directly connected to what we said earlier about Lashon hara, the power of Lashon hara, and of course Lashon tov, because speech is not just some type of, someone says, who cares what I said? It's what I felt or what I said. It's not correct. It's all about how you communicate and how you reach, and you communicate and reach to others. He also brings the chavrusa idea, to learn on your own as opposed to learn with a chavrusa. Chavrusa is where you're expressing it in speech and you have an engaging and even a holy argument in a topic, that all that brings out a deeper essence of who we are. That's the power of speech. This essay and the others that I'm going to read are all now posted on our site, meaningfullife.com/MyLife/contest. And if you sign up to our newsletter, we send out every week new essays that we're posting on an ongoing basis. So we move on to the next one. The next one is Dirah B'Tachtenim as a model for transformation by Yitzchak Einstein, age 26, Chabad of Midtown. And he titled it Estimation, Impression, and the Meaning of Life, based on chapters 10 to 13 of the Gate of Unity of Rabbi Dave Ben Shneur, the Shari Yichud of the Mittler Rebbe. It's a very interesting presentation based on three themes that the Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe, explains in Shari Yichud in these chapters, Yud through Yud Gimmel, called Kadmen, Rishimu, and Tzimtzum. Whereas one begins with a vision and a dream, how that becomes an impression, and how finally through Tzimtzum it becomes a reality. And he spells it out and applies it to our lives, and in each of our lives we have these three stages. Very nicely done. It could have been more developed, which probably would have given a higher score. As I said, they're all pretty close in the top essays. But nevertheless, very well done in the sense of taking a seemingly abstract idea that discusses more on the cosmic level and applying it to human beings and how we communicate with each other and how we deal with each other. Okay, that is essay number 2. And finally, the third essay we'll review today is actually, I want to correct myself. What I just read was Estimation, Impression, and the Meaning of Life by Yehuda Ringler, age 21, Shliach in Yeshiva Tmimei Derech in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So I correct myself. I said Dirah B'Tachtenim as a model for transformation by Yitzchak Einstein, 26, Chabad of Midtown, is the one I'll read now. So I stand corrected. I hope you forgive me. So Dirah B'Tachtenim, which we hear so much about, he does in a very original and creative way, takes it as a model of transformation where he writes that obviously the focal point of Chassidus is Dirah B'Tachtenim. And in general, we may conceive, when talking about God or any type of two entities, he writes, in principle, we might conclude that two distinct entities cannot unite. Two independent disciplines that are governed by their own sets of laws and systems are fundamentally separate and exclusive of each other. And the only way one can affect the other is through exertion of power, because there's no common ground and no dialogue and no relationship. Therefore, based on that argument, the only way to sincerely connect to God is through total submission. The philosophy of Dirah B'Tachtenim, he writes, suggests the contrary. Through exerting power and imposing ideals, we can modify behavior and gain compliance, but cannot affect change. Change must come from within. And even the least amount of external influence will interfere and obstruct genuine transformation. Dirah B'Tachtenim B'Gidrei Tachtenim, which is consistent to what I discussed earlier about Gimmel Tammuz, the Daitacha. That's what makes it, we own it. It becomes part of us. That's the real purpose. The real purpose is not because we're so wise, because we have so much power. It's to make it that we are not just bystanders, but we're part of the process because we've internalized it. Which, of course, gives that whole import that I discussed earlier about the power of Gimmel Tammuz. He doesn't write that. I'm just pointing it out in connection. So basically, Dirah Tachteni, what he does is shows the relationship where you can have a real symbiosis between two entities here, between the divine and existence, and does so in a very powerful way, explaining it in 3 steps, how we actually go through the transformation of Dirah Tachtenim and developing that relationship. And finally, he writes that the Dirah Tachtenim paradigm provides a valuable tool we can apply in all of our influential relationships, influencing children, students, acquaintances, spouses, and basically in every area of life, when we see it not as dominance or control or passivity and submission, but we see it as transformation, where one entity becomes transformed and becomes a Dirah, Tachteni becomes a Dirah, a home, a comfortable home, on its terms, to something of a greater nature. And he explains how that can also deal with insecurities and other challenges that plague humanity. Finally, he concludes, at a time in history when we unfortunately don't have constant direct inspiration from our Rebbe, we have to really take to heart and internalize the message, tut als was erkennt. The only way we can complete the synthesis and accomplish a real Dirah Tachtenim is from within, without external inspiration and influence. Well said, and takes us back to the original theme of Gimmel Tammuz, which is that we are now charged with that challenge to take and make it ours. In some way, before Gimmel Tammuz, at the end of the day, the Rebbe lifted us. The Giluyim were there. And again, not we wanted this, but now we have this. This ultimately will demonstrate that we are really ready. Because today, it's coming from within, it's coming from your initiative. When I see 21-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 15-year-olds who never saw the Rebbe, inspired, go to camp, or do other things that are tremendously dedicated, it's what better proof of truth is that than there? Because they have no Giluyim at all. It's only what they heard, what they've learned, and what they've internalized. So the internalization today is unprecedented. It's a challenge, but it's there. So now, finally, for the surprise of the audio recording that I played at the outset of this episode. So someone sent it to me a while ago, and they had no idea what it was. I listened to it a number of times. So you have Rabbi Chadikov speaking, and then you have the Rebbe interjecting. And I was thinking, where would the Rebbe interject with Chadikov speaking? Chadikov giving a speech, with the Rebbe middle cut him off? It's not, doesn't seem at all the Rebbe doing that. But then I was listening to what Rabbi Chadikov was reading, and it came to me. It's a sikha from Baalei Tammuz, Tafshin Ches, printed in Sefer Maimorim Tafshin Tes, page 198. And Rabbi Chadikov is reading that. And the Rebbe is commenting on it. What they were doing, and I know this from my own work, this is how you do proofing. They were proofing this sikha before publication. Rabbi Chadikov was reading it, and the Rebbe probably had the original manuscript, and comparing. So Rabbi Chadikov is reading, word for word. And the Rebbe comments, I haven't worked out all the Rebbe's words, but I did work out that the Rebbe cut him off somewhere and says to Rabbi Chadikov that something is missing. Something is wrong here. The zusammengemischt zwei Sachen, the Rebbe says. Was is in Yerushalmi, Medrashim, and all the Sachen. And then the Rebbe concludes in a humorous note, he says, no, it's Mashiach's Zeiten. If you listen to it again, you'll see. So this is the earliest to-date recording of the Rebbe on tape. It's 1949, because when was this kuntus released? This kuntus was released for Baalei Tammuz Tafshin Tes. And the date that the Rebbe writes for this kuntus, all printed again in Sefer Maimorim Tafshin Tes, kuntus Chagagul Yud Gimmel Tammuz Hey Tafshin Tes. What is the date on this kuntus? Gimmel Tammuz Hey Tafshin Tes, which of course was a day is known as the Schalta de Geula of the Frierdiker Rebbe. That's the date. So I found it appropriate to be able to play that. And again, this is the earliest known recording of the Rebbe. And listen to it again. And if you can make out more of the words, please share them. You have Rabbi Chadikov reading. As I said, when we used to proof things, this is how you proof Someone reads the typeset material, and someone else is listening and comparing it to the original, so that way you avoid the mistakes. And the Rebbe commenting that there's something here that's confusing. Interestingly, what's printed here is exactly the way Rabbi Chadikov read it. So it clearly was not corrected, but the Rebbe clearly had comments that, till this day, I don't believe there are comments that we know of on this little piece here about being a mashpech, which is like a funnel. But this is where it is. It's the earliest known recording of the Rebbe. Again, it would be around Gimmel Tammuz Tavshin Tes, a little earlier, because it was published then. So I assume this came, they proofread it a little earlier than that. And that's what we Pirsum edition that we publicize here. And hopefully everybody can share it with each other, something interesting to go back to hear the Rebbe's voice from back then, so many years ago, the earliest, as I said, the recording to date. So with this, we can come to the conclusion of MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 71, Gimmel Tammuz. Kairach challenged the concept of a Rebbe, and of course, Gimmel Tammuz this week, year Shabbos Parsha Kairach. The original 21 years ago was Mitzvah Shabbos Parsha Kairach. So Kairach and Gimmel Tammuz have some connection, but we do not succumb. Kairach did not prevail. Moshe Rabbeinu prevailed. The Eibishter prevailed. A Rebbe is with us, and we need the Rebbe, Begashmis and Beruchnis, but even when you do not see it Begashmis, it should not hold us up from doing what we have to do. On the contrary, today it has to be one that comes from our effort. May the Eibishter bless us all. As we go into this week, we should do our small part and finish the job that we were charged with. And questions can be asked, but they should be not in any way that disturb the actions that we have to do. And we should be zeiche, that and we should have V'hu Yigalenu and the Sidarenu Berashenu, and finally the Gula Hamitis Vashlema that we've all been waiting for after all these years of birurim and refinement and work that we've done. And now come the last steps of Yefutzu Menesechel Chutza. As I mentioned last week, that hachlota that the Rebbe said in Chukas Tovshem Memches, that everyone should take on 3 new hachlotas and resolutions. What they're doing was for Yud Beis Tammuz, but clearly appropriate right now to take on 3 real resolutions and write them into the Rebbe, like the Rebbe said then, Chukas Memches. Any way you want to do that, to the oil or other ways that you communicate with the Rebbe, and take on 3 hachlotas b'peil. As I said, I am definitely taking on these 3, and I'll share what they are when we have next week more time. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 71. Everyone should have a real Seder week, more than ever before, showing and demonstrating to the Eibishter and to all those Lamaila that we remain connected, and we're continuing to fulfill the shlichus of the Dirah that we were charged with. Everyone have a very blessed week.